Yes, welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV and to our continuing coverage of the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show 2025. Yes, so welcome back again to Classic Dirt Bike TV and to our continuing coverage of the Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show 2025. And it's quite hard to imagine that we filmed all this footage way back in early February of this year, and this is getting on to the middle of March now, and we've still got a couple of episodes to make our way through. So again, thanks to everybody who's taken the time to watch my content. So let's press straight on with episode 7 and take a look at our latest batch of Telford motorcycles. Yes, welcome back to our continuing coverage of the 2025 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, and I do hope you've enjoyed what we've brought you in the previous 6 episodes, as this of course is episode 7 of at least 8 or possibly even 9, depending on how much footage that we have remaining. And so we're going to begin this latest episode by taking a look around the Dot Motorcycle Club's display, who always have quite a good selection of these old British classics. And first up, it's this 1970 Dot 250 Scrambler, which is actually a bike that I'm quite familiar with because I did do a feature on this bike some years ago when the previous owner had it up for sale, and since then, as far as I'm aware, it's now got a brand new owner. Anyhow, in its previous life, this lovely little Dot was owned by John Rogerson, who lived in the Scottish borders. And believe it or not, John owned and he actually raced this bike for 52 years. And it was way back in the 1960s when John was a much younger man. At that time, he was looking to buy or build a bike that he could use at local scrambles events. But it was also around this same time that Villiers were selling off the remaining stocks of parts and engines, and so John made the trip to Villiers HQ and soon returned with a brand new Villiers Star Maker engine, of which I think he paid about £35 for at that time. So John certainly had his engine, and he then immediately began sending out letters to a selection of different bike manufacturers to ask them if they would be interested in building a bike for him around his Star Maker engine. And in fact, the only manufacturer that replied was Dot, who told John that they'd build him a complete motorcycle around his Star Maker motor, complete with leading link forks for just £165. And what you're looking at here is basically the finished article, although John did carry out a full restoration on this bike just a few years ago. But these old Dot Scramblers did have a very simple steel box section chassis and a fiberglass fuel tank as well, which was quite typical of that late 1960s and early 1970s era. Now, up at the front we had those leading link forks with those old school drum brakes as well, which again were period correct for the 1970s. But this is still the same 250 Star Maker engine that John bought from Villiers all those years ago for £35. Those were the days when you could walk into a factory and just hand over 35 quid and then walk out with a brand new Scrambles engine. So this is just what this 1970 250 Dot looked like when I filmed it a few years ago, and this was just soon after John had completed a full restoration on the bike prior to putting it up for sale. But as to who now owns this bike, I don't know, but as I remember, John, he wasn't asking a whole lot of money for his old Dot when he was selling it, so I do hope the new owners paid a decent price, because he's got himself a very nice example of one of these British made classics, which will without doubt be good enough to use as a show bike or for maybe a quick run around the track at local vintage scramble events. So there you have it. That's our first Dot example, a 1970 250. Now, on the other hand, if we take a look at this other not so shiny little Dot, which is almost certainly unrestored, and by the looks of this old timer, you don't get much more original than this. But again, this example here never had any information about its life or year of manufacture, but I'm guessing that it's around the 1950s, going by the overall patina and the parts that are bolted onto it. But even although I know absolutely nothing about this little Dot, there's no question that this is without doubt the real deal. And the more you look at this little bike, the more stock parts that you find on it, because you can see that this Dot never had any kind of refurb or resto, and probably never even a wash in the last 60 odd years, and it's still got the mud and the detritus that it's picked up during its last time it was used on the track. And don't quote me here, but these could even still be the original tyres as well on this bike. And once again here up at the front, the traditional leading link forks that still have their 1950s factory paint on them, and something else that's quite super rare to find on an old Dot of this vintage is the original front dampers. So you're certainly looking at a genuine piece of history here with this little bike. But as we make our way on to our Villiers two-stroke engine, I'm guessing here that this is at least a 197 or possibly even a 250 cc engine with that very radical short exhaust that wraps around the cylinder. But it's fed its fuel through an old Amal monoblock carburetor, which I'm not even sure did have an air filter when it was first made all those years ago. But when you look at the design of this exhaust, your right leg must have been kept quite nice and cosy when that Villiers engine was running, directing those hot exhaust fumes onto your gear shifting leg. So you can see that it was quite a compact little two-stroke unit. But this old Dot, maybe not too much to look at, but it still oozes originality, because it still has its own factory seat fitted, and even those things like number plates are definitely of that period, because guys who bought these bikes just normally made their own plates out of a bit of alloy, and then they just simply painted their race number on them, exactly as you see here, because at this time plastic plates were still many years away, so it was just a case of trying to keep your pennies in your pocket and make do. Other parts like the handlebars, alloy fuel tank, and the front and the rear aluminium mudguards are still the self-same 1950s or even 60s factory parts. And even the little Dot's worn-out seat certainly is showing signs of being used quite a lot in the last 60 years. Now, I expect that some of the viewers out there will maybe look at this machine and think to themselves, what a pile of junk. Although I certainly don't see it that way, because this bike I see is a piece of unmolested Dot history, and I'm quite surprised that it's even survived without undergoing some kind of repairs or maybe refurbishment. And as I mentioned, I don't know who it belongs to now, but or its past story, but one thing's for sure, you're looking at a mechanical time capsule that's probably more than 60 years old. Anyhow, in sharp contrast to our last Dot example, we have this immaculate Dot trials bike, which once more had no details about its construction or ownership posted next to it, which is a bit of a shame really, because so I suppose it's okay if you know exactly what you're looking at here, but to the untrained eye you'd probably see that this is just another classic trials bike. Because normally most of these kind of display bikes usually have a little bit of information placed next to them, giving you a little background on its manufacture and history, which is quite handy for the likes of me when you know that you're not an expert on all things trials, but you can see that this bike's very well made with this lovely alloy fuel tank and what looks like one of the later Villiers two-stroke engines. But I'm sure that you're already aware that the history of Dot motorcycles dates back, I think it's to around 1903, when it was first founded by the great Harry Reid in the city of Salford in Manchester, who even in the early 1900s was a pioneering motorcyclist who, it said, won the Isle of Man TT race in 1908 on a Dot motorcycle that he built himself. And it's also documented that Harry Reid's wife, Hannah, was believed to be the very first lady motorcycle rider in Manchester at that time. Although throughout the following 40s, 50s and 60s, Harry Reid and his Dot Motors Company built a variety of two- and three-wheeler motorcycles, and they launched their first trials bike around 1950, which of course then led on to building Dot Scramblers in 1961. But of course this bike here's got a simple steel chassis, which I think might even be a special frame and not necessarily a Dot built chassis. But the forks on the front here look like they could be a pair of those high quality REH units. And at the back it's a simple steel box section swing arm, and the rear shocks on this Dot trials machine are a pair of those high quality classic rock shocks. But as I mentioned, I didn't have any information or background on this feature bike on the day, so I can't really furnish you with all of the details on its construction, but it's probably suffice to say that it's quite a smart looking piece of kit. And if you're a trials man and maybe a bit more knowledgeable fanatic than myself, then I'm sure you'll know exactly what you're looking at here. Now, there is one display that I always look forward to seeing at Telford each year, and That's Mark Rampley's Rin-Tut Wasp sidecar scramble outfits. And in the previous years at Telford, Mark's brought along some superb examples of his three-wheeler sidecar off-roaders. And the first one that we're going to take a look at is this magnificent 1984 Wasp Yamaha RT27, which, as I remember, I think belongs to Greg Werenham. Anyhow, this lovely vision of mechanical excellence has just recently undergone a full refurbishment to take it back to its original 1984 condition. But whether you like or even dislike these three-wheel outfits, one thing that's undeniable about their construction is the NASA-style engineering that goes in to building them. So let's just start by taking a look at the chassis, which I'm told is made from CSF5 hydraulic grade steel tubing, which is then bronze welded and then usually nickel plated. And you can see the engineering and the construction that goes into completing one of these Wasp chassis. It's a far more complex and intricate construction process than just building a simple solo two-wheeler. And these RT27 or Rin-Tut 27 chassis were said to be one of the most popular that Robin Rin-Tut designed, alongside, of course, a list of other frames that he constructed. And as you can gather, these frames have to be a lot stronger than its solo counterparts to try and help counteract all the different forces caused by the bike's quite sizable sidecar and chair. And as we move on to the power plant on our RT27 outfit, it's the old and hugely successful Yamaha XS twin-cylinder engine, which down the years has been used on a multitude of different road-going and off-road bikes. And originally this engine would have been a 650 cc twin, but of course with this being a competition outfit that requires a bit more grunt, then this engine here's had a few improvements over its standard original, and it's now been bored out to a much more respectable 880 cc's. Now, at the time of filming this bike, I never actually got the chance to get any of the specs of this engine from Mark, but I'll wager that it's got a set of big valves, maybe even a hot cam, and possibly a heavier clutch, and maybe even some porting as well to the cylinder head. And at 880 cc's, it should certainly be able enough to hustle this big rig along at a decent rate of knots. And once again, up here at the front end of these RT chassis, they had this kind of leading link front fork setup. And as for the front suspension, you could certainly fit all manner of different units here at the bottom of the suspension. And in our case here, it looks like it's a pair of Dutch-made Reiger piggyback units, which I understand were very classy, and you certainly had loads of different ways to make adjustments to the rebound and the damping. And as you'd expect, a rig of this size and weight, it certainly takes a bit of stopping, and so that particular job is down to these Italian 4-pot Brembo brakes, which I'm sure is exactly the same here on the rear driving wheel. So not only does this outfit have the means to go fast, it also has a pretty powerful set of brakes as well. But as far as I'm aware, these Rin-Tut Wasp fuel tanks are still being made in fiberglass, and of course it needs to be quite sizable as well to hold enough gas to keep that Yamaha twin engine ticking over. And also here in the rider's or driver's seat, it's a decent sized and well padded seat, which you'd expect it to have because it's quite a rough ride being a driver or even a passenger in one of these outfits, because both parties have very important jobs to do, with the driver in charge of keeping the bike going as quick as he can, and of course the passenger counterbalancing the rig into and out of the corners. And this strategically placed plastic guard is of course to try and stop the passenger sticking a stray leg into that rotating drive wheel. So that's our first rig from the Wasp motorcycle guys, a superbly engineered RT27 outfit belonging to Greg Werenham, and one of 3 outfits that Mark Rampley brought along to Telford 2025. So that last rig that you had a look at was an RT27, and this big bruiser here is a 1984 RT26, and this time this one here is powered by a massive 1000cc Wasp 4-stroke power plant. Now, as I recall, this is Mark's own RT outfit, and although it maybe look immaculate and well turned out, Mark did tell me that this unit here is an ex-Terry Good machine, and it's still raced on a regular basis. So once again, the construction of the chassis and its running gear are very much the same as our previous RT27, although this time rather than the twin-cylinder Yamaha 4-stroke engine, we've got a proper Rind-Tut Wasp 1000. Now this beauty of a power plant is one of those super rare Robin Rind-Tut built engines, which as I remember, I think it was a twin-cylinder air-cooled 4-stroker that had twin overhead cams, and I'm pretty sure it had a 4-valve head as well. And this was an absolute brute of an engine, and certainly just the job for keeping this RT26 outfit at the sharp end of the pack. But back in the day, a lot of these RT chassis were powered by Norton or sometimes Triumph twins, and when the late Robin Rind-Tut designed this motor, it was all custom made to fit inside this chassis. But when you look at the engine, you can see it was an old school kickstart that was used to get it fired into life, although what it was actually like to start a 1000cc 4-stroker like this, I'm not exactly sure, but I'd expect it would have had some sort of decompressor to aid kicking it over. But the late Robin, or Robbie as he was more commonly known, was an aircraft engineer employed by the Ministry of Defence in Boscombe Down in the UK, which is where he honed his skills to go on and build these Wasp engines and sidecar chassis. And during the 1960s, 70s and 80s, Robbie was certainly in high demand for his bike building skills, and the workmanship that he used in aircraft building certainly rubbed off when it came to putting together these kind of outfits. And once more, just like our RT27, a nice pair of Dutch-made Ryger piggyback shock absorbers again, which of course have those nice Rind-Tut socks that go over the springs just to try and protect them from stones and other items that get thrown up from the track. Now we've also got another heavy-duty hydraulic disc brake here at the front, which I'm not sure if it is an Italian Brembo one, just like our RT27, but here at the back of our RT26, another set of Ryger piggyback shocks, and a quite substantial rear brake there as well, because when that big Wasp engine's running, this back wheel can certainly dig some very nice deep trenches. And once more, another fiberglass fuel tank, just as in our previous machine, but this time in this quite nice looking metal flake red colour. And again, up here in the pilot seat, you have all of the usual controls that you'd find on one of the two-wheeler solo bikes, which Rin Tut also build. Although if you've never been lucky enough to see these outfits racing, then you should try and make a point of getting out to one of their events, because when you get a dozen or so of these outfits racing each other on the track, then it's quite a spectacle, and not only for your eyes but for your ears as well, when you hear these big Wasp 1000s and other bikes like that twin-cylinder Yamaha blast around the track. But that's another couple of good outfits there from Mark Rampley and the guys at Wasp Motorcycles. And if you'd like to know maybe a little bit more about their history and their machines, then why don't you just take a quick look around the Wasp website. Now, if you're into your British motocross racers and you've been an ardent follower of British motocross in general for a few years, then you may be interested in some nice books that Jeff Shuttleworth has put together that basically contains stories, stats and pictures from the British motocross championships. And I think it consists of 3 volumes with a total of 406 pages of the history of some of the best years of British motocross. But these 3 books are certainly an excellent memory of UK off-road racing, when some of our greatest stars were household legends. And maybe if you're of a certain age, then there's also a good chance that you were even at some of the great races that are listed in these books. But anyhow, Volume 1 is titled The New Dawn, and it covers the years 1975 to 1982. And Volume 2 is titled The Changing of the Guard, which is 1983 to 1989. But the most recent is called The Next Generation, and it covers the years 1990 to 1996. But as yet, I haven't actually read these books myself, but they're certainly receiving a lot of good feedback from people who have purchased them. And if you think that this might be something that you'd be interested in, then just get in touch with Jeff at this email address, and he'll send you what you need right to your front door. Okay, so just to conclude our episode 7 from Telford 2025, we're going to take a look at this quite nice 1974 545 CCM that was yet another bike that was being offered up for sale over the course of the Telford weekend. Now, there was no price and no contact details included in this bike's description. Nevertheless, the vendor did state that it was an original 1974 Clues bike, but he also said on the bike description that the frame and the swing arm had been re-chromed. The wheels are brand new, and other parts like both mudguards, airbox and the bike's seat cover were all replacement parts. But nevertheless, it's still quite another good example of one of these popular Alan Clues 74 classics. And in fact, it's so popular that Joe Maxwell Engineering are still making reproduction versions of this 1974 model, which we'll take a look at when we get to episode 8, which of course will be our next video posting. But nevertheless, I'm sure you're already aware that these 1974 CCMs were only the second Clues bike that Alan Clues built, because his first real CCM was launched in 1973, although he did build a bike the year before, which he called the Clues Stroker, which was just before he officially registered the name Clues Competition Machines. But these fantastic four-stroke scramblers were powered by these very successful BSA B50 engines, which was essentially just a road bike engine that Alan Clues tuned for more power, because when Alan bought out what was left of the defunct BSA competition department in the early 1970s, they basically then just handed over everything to Alan, other than give him access to the BSA competition factory engines. And so Alan did what any other entrepreneur would do. He just simply took a stock BSA B50 road bike engine and then reworked it for use as a motocross power plant. And again, according to the information posted with this bike, this engine here has been completely rebuilt. And as far as a British-built motocrosser is concerned, these four-stroke CCMs were still able to hang with the might of the Japanese two-strokers of the 1970s and early 80s, and quite often beat them as well. Now, these classic Hagen shocks at the back aren't, of course, the original items that would have been fitted in 1974. It probably would have been something like maybe a pair of girdling units or something similar that would have been bolted on to these bikes at the back. Although the vendor who was selling the bike did say that this was the 1974 original CCM fuel tank from that year, and that seat behind it is also sporting its brand new cover. And up here at the front end of our Clues 545, we've got a decent pair of forks as well, which appear to be correct for its year, although I do know that CCM did eventually go on to manufacture their own forks around the late 1970s. So as you can see, this is still quite a nice looking bike, and from an era when CCM were just beginning to get their act together and the motocross world were beginning to take notice of the brand new British motorcycle builder and what his big thumper four-strokers could achieve on the track. And these 1974s were just a sample of what was to come from the very creative Bolton-based CCM factory. Anyhow, these are just a few of the bikes that we'll be looking at in episode 8, and in fact we still have enough footage for a final episode, which will be number 9. So there's still plenty old classics to come from Telford 2025, so make sure that you subscribe to my CDB TV channel so that you don't miss out on the remaining machines from this year's show. But thanks once again for giving up your valuable time to watch my content, and until we get around to posting episode 8, it's cheerio for now.